Hi friends, welcome to the Singer Studio. Today we're going to be talking about the evolution of the operatic voice, how it's changed throughout the years, so let's get into it. Before there was bel canto, before we had Caruso, before we had Maria Callas, there was something more radical, the invention of opera as an art form in itself. The first Italian opera that we know of is by a composer called Jacopo Peri, called Daphne, composed in 1597. In Florence. Though the music is lost, his next opera, Eurydice, 1600, is still with us, making it the oldest complete opera in existence. Opera was born from the ideals of the Florentine Camerata, a group of Renaissance poets and musicians and thinkers who aimed to revive the expressive power of the ancient Greek drama. They believed that music should serve the text and that the human voice was the most powerful tool for emotion which we had. Then came Claudio Monteverdi, whose L'Orfeo in 1607 raised the bar, melding recitatives, instrumental textures and emotional singing in a way the world had never heard before. He was humanizing this art form. The voices used for these early operas weren't built for power. There were no huge orchestras to compete with. In these days, singers prized agility, clarity and nuance, and florid ornamentation with trills, sighs and rapid runs. This wasn't stuff just for show, it was a technical necessity, allowing long lines to be sung with breath pressure, never pushing, floating on air, no blasting. This florid Italian vocalism would evolve into something more refined, something that we now call bel canto. But before we talk about bel canto, there is another era of vocal development that we need to talk about, and one that is almost mythical in today's world, and that is the world of the castrato. In the 17th and 18th centuries in Italy, women were normally barred from singing in public. So thousands of young boys with promising voices were castrated before puberty to preserve their treble range, laid in a bath of warm milk, drugged, and then this horrendous procedure took place. It was outlawed by the church. It was illegal, but thousands of accidents happened. Falling off horses, jumping over fences, a botched hernia. In fact, historians estimate that in some years up to 2,000 boys a year underwent this fate. They went on, the good ones, to train in elite conservatories like the San Donofrio or the Pietà del Turchini in Naples, often for many years, up to a decade. There exists a legendary sheet of paper containing lots of vocal exercises, detailing the incredible discipline that was required: arpeggi, trills, circular leaps, breathing exercises. There are historical stories of a young boy being admitted into a vocal school, being told to stand in the corner for 7 hours a day, sing what was on this paper over and over and over again. Imagine how that developed a young boy that was denied the ability to go through normal puberty and yet was developing lung power and capacity. The lithographs of the day, which detail how these children looked, show us extraordinary figures with huge chests. And the voices themselves were said to be able to carry enormous power, childlike voices in adult bodies. It must have been truly extraordinary. Of course, the most famous castrati were Farinelli and Caffarelli, and they were nothing short of superstars. Farinelli had this 3-octave range, flawless breath control, and could sustain notes longer than any orchestra. Caffarelli was more aggressive in style, and he was known for his spectacular agility and diva-like personality. It was said that when Farinelli sang his famous bomba, which was a high note, you'd start soft, crescendo into a loud note, and diminuendo back into a soft note. Often for people, it's estimated up to 60 seconds, women would swoon and would often reach orgasm. That's what people said. And if you think about it, they'd never heard, they had no resource to recordings. YouTube didn't exist back then, so the only time you would hear a human voice would be in these public performances. It must have been extraordinary. Today, we have incredible singers like Michael Spires and Cecilia Bartoli, who are bringing back this lost art form and showing us just how incredibly ornate and difficult to sing this repertoire is. It's truly a reminder of a lost world of vocal acrobatics and theatrical power. By the early 1800s, Italian singing had reached a golden age, the age of bel canto, literally beautiful singing. This was the world of Bellini, Donizetti, and early Rossini. They wrote long lines, floating lines, requiring impeccable breath control, even vibrato, agility, and grace. Voices were lighter, more flexible. High notes were not forced, but floated. Singers were trained to sustain lines using minimal subglottal pressure and maximum artistry. One of the greatest tenors of this era, Giovanni Battista Rubini, could sing up to a high F above top C, using a sort of pharyngeal mixed voice, head voice like falsetto tone that shimmered rather than shouted. To modern ears, it would seem light, but to 19th century audiences, it was divine. Back then, the boundaries between voice types were blurry. Baritones and basses often overlapped. Sopranos and mezzos sang the same roles. Rossini's original Figaro was said to have taken his high notes in a head voice falsetto. And more importantly, composers were writing the music for the singers that they had. Mozart wrote his Queen of the Night role because he had a singer that could sustain and sing those top Fs. In fact, there's a famous story when he wrote Come Scoglio in Così fan tutte. He did so to reportedly mock a soprano who was said to bob her head up and down with each ascent to the high note and down to the low note because he wanted to make her look like a chicken. The singers shaped the score. There's a top F in I Puritani because Bellini heard Rubini had that top F. And then came a man who would change vocal pedagogy, Manuel Garcia, tenor and vocal pedagogue, father to both famed mezzo Maria Malibran and the legendary teacher Manuel Garcia and Pauline Viardot. He emphasized the appoggio idea of singing. He talked about subglottal pressure and the glottal attack. He was leading towards us having the forward tilted larynx of the Melocchi school. He was creating a vocal school of singing that allowed voices to become stronger, more connected, as I said, more subglottal pressure, which would lead us on to the 19th century Verdi and Meyerbeer and Wagner's era, where voices would become stronger as orchestras grew and were able to develop in the more dramatic fashion. In 1937, the opera world was shaken by a single note. French tenor Gilbert Louis Duprez performed Rossini's Guillaume Tell in Paris, William Tell, and he famously sang a top C from chest voice. Until then, tenors had been singing their high notes in a head voice mix or falsetto, but Duprez brought a raw, full-bodied sound. Critics were horrified. One said it sounded like a man being garroted, but audiences loved it. And this was the birth not only of the heroic tenor, but of the heroic voice. And it was the birth of opera's shift towards vocal power and the voice itself as being an expressive device intrinsically for the sound it would make and not just for the way it would express the line and the words that the composer had written. In Italy, Giuseppe Verdi took over, and he started to write for bigger orchestras. Not as heavy as Wagner, of course. Wagner was expanding the orchestras and creating a bigger sound that needed more vocal weight. But Verdi was doing something similarly, and singing beautifully was no longer just enough. Verdi wanted a sound that had weight and truth. His tenors became stronger. Baritones had to become kings and noble rulers, requiring a particular nobility of sound with a heavy sound, baritone, heavy sound. Sopranos had to master coloratura and drama. Think of Abigaile in Nabucco or Leonora in Trovatore. Lyrico drammatico, high, florid, but also powerful. The original Otello, Tamagno, had a voice that could blast through an orchestra like a trumpet. It wasn't a subtle voice, but it was thrilling, and we can still hear it on record today. It wasn't a dark sound that was being developed as we moved into chiaroscuro. It was almost shrill and shouted. You can hear the larynx is still not as tilted forward as was coming, but it was powerful, and it was paving the way towards the modern voiced tenor that we have today. The first exponent of this was Enrico Caruso. I will do a tribute purely to Enrico Caruso, one of my absolute heroes. He changed the opera world forever. At first, traditionalists found him vulgar. He sobbed, he used terms like piangendi, he emoted, he broke the rules. But when Caruso started to make his breakthrough in the late 1900s, early 20th century, he brought a low laryngeal placement, a low larynx, that gave him this rich, dark and expressive colour that audiences just found extraordinary. In his book, Caruso and the Art of Singing, he explained how laryngeal depth created richness and fullness of sound. Then came the gramophone. In 1902, a young man called Fred Gaisberg heard Caruso in Milan. He was a young recording engineer, and he couldn't believe what he was hearing. He telegraphed his office in London, his master's voice, and said, "Look, I've just heard the greatest voice that the world has ever known. Can I record him?" And they said no. But he ignored it, and he met Caruso in the Grand Hotel in Milan in 1902, and they recorded 10 arias in the hotel room, Caruso standing on a crate to meet that big wooden horn that he had to stand with his head right into. These recordings became legendary. You can hear them today, they are extraordinary. In fact, Caruso's recording of Vesti la Giubba a few years later became the first million-selling record. He was a true operatic superstar. I have a lot to say about him. He changed my life, and I love his singing today. And with modern techniques, we can hear him better and better and clearer and clearer. Meanwhile, in Germany, Wagner was forging something colossal. He eliminated arias, he expanded orchestras, he created endless, continuous melodic scenes. To sing Wagner, you needed a cathedral of sound. The Helden tenor was born here, leading to singers in the late 20th century such as Lorenz Melchior, John Vickers, that could sustain Tristan or Siegfried without breaking their larynxes. Singers that we have on record like Kirsten Flagstad, astonishingly, who was a soubrette until her 50s. Birgit Nielsen had vocal steel, perfect legato and tone. These singers, yes, they used squillo and ring to pierce the sound without shouting, but they had this vocal base of resonance that could sing all night without tiring. Wagner was writing operas sometimes 7 hours long. Extraordinary stamina was needed. Then, of course, came composers like Puccini, Mascagni, and Leoncavallo that demanded raw emotion. Voices had to scream, to sigh, to cry, to soar. Opera was no longer mythical. It was real, true. Verismo. The word itself means truth. With the advent of radio and LPs, composers started to write for the 3-minute LP song that you would get on an old 78. So opera started to move into the living room. And we started to move into an era where composers were actually writing arias that could be performed for albums and LPs. Audiences no longer had to travel to the opera house. They could buy a complete opera recording of an opera. They started to learn more about the opera and the voices that they wanted to listen to. They could hear Maria Callas, Tebaldi, Gigli, Pavarotti from their own home. And with that shift, opera became more intimate. Maria Callas wasn't just a singer, she was a dramatic force, bringing tragedy to every phrase. Check out my Maria Callas tribute on YouTube. Jussi Björling, and we'll be releasing a tribute to him next week, was famed for his seamless legato and golden tone. Franco Corelli, there will also be a tribute about him, wrought animal magnetism and explosive high notes that bordered on dangerous. Montserrat Caballé could spin a pianissimo line that felt so delicate it was like silk brushing your cheek. And then, of course, came Pavarotti, probably the biggest opera star since Caruso, who famously sang to football tournaments and who had this famous top seat and transcended the world of opera. This time, fans could compare voices and debates would start to erupt. Do you prefer the steel of Delmonico or the velvet of Jussi Björling? Do you want the baritone heft of a Bastianini or the golden legato of a Gino Becchi and the snarl? This also used to lead to the preservation of these vocal schools. Where once knowledge had to be passed from teacher to student, now entire generations could see and hear how it was done. And these lessons are preserved. And so the schools of singing, from Malocca's low laryngeal school to the Swedish-Italian blend, could coexist side by side, studied by singers, available to view on YouTube or in conservatories. Opera has gone from being a mysterious art form to being preserved for the next generation. And we have various schools existing at the same time. Today, opera is more global, more diverse, more accessible than ever before. Young artists from Asia, Africa, South America are now and beyond are now able to grace the world stages. We have the Korean school of singing. We have the Eastern European school. The physiology of their faces and their vocal resonances are bringing new corners and niches to the operatic world. There's a renewed fascination with early music and historically performed and informed performances. Countertenors flourish. Falsetto is no longer taboo. Sopranistas like Bruno Bessa and Samuel Marino are bringing the castrato repertoire to life, singing Vivaldi, Handel, and earlier with a blend of athleticism and grace that is astonishing modern ears. It astonishes me. Coloratura is absolutely in vogue again. Arias that once were thought unsingable are now the norm, like A mes amis from Fil Regiment or Cessa di più resistere from Il Barbiere di Sevilla, which were thought, well, you can't sing them, until Pavarotti famously sang the A mes amis in the Met. Well, they're now always sung. They're now required. You can't perform without them. Stars like Nadine Sierra, Lisette Oropesa, Pretty Yende from South Africa, Angel Blue, sopranos with technical mastery and emotional depth, Marie D'Angelo, Clementine Margaina, can't pronounce these names, mezzi who bring fire and finesse, tenors Benjamin Bernheim, Freddie Tommaso, or mine, Sayek Jung Bayek, Jonathan Titelman, tenors who balance power and emotional truth. Apologize for my pronunciations. Etienne Dupuis, Ludovic Tezier, Queen Kelsey, Bass Vinograd, Alexander Vinograd. These are steeped in the Verdi tradition. Opera training is now more scientific than ever. We understand the mechanics of breathing, the resonance, psychology, the vocal health like never before. Stages range from boutique baroque houses to high-definition live streams watched in cinemas across the world. And thanks to this technology, we are no longer losing great techniques to time. You can study the Malocchi method. You can study the Lomonical method on YouTube. You can find a teacher. We can teach. I teach most of my pupils online on Zoom. Get in touch if you want to work with me. Yes, the world has changed, but the voice is still at the heart of all of it. It's a golden age of opera. We have incredible voices still coming through. But some will still say, well, they don't sing like they used to in my time. And maybe that's true for them and for you, because whoever you first loved, whether it was Callas, Caruso, Pavarotti, René Fleming, they will always hold a special place in your heart. My heart tenor Jussi Björling. Check out the tribute next week. And that's the magic of memory. It's not just about how someone sang, but how they made you feel. But make no mistake, great singers still walk among us. They are singing in opera houses right now. Opera is not dead. It's not even dying. It's just evolving. Hey, if you've enjoyed this journey through the evolution of the opera voice, why not subscribe? This is the Singer Studio. We talk about everything to do with singing here. We talk about vocal singers. We have tributes for great singers. We are delving more and more into technique, us emphasizing the need to find a singing teacher. I myself give many lessons every week on Zoom. If you want to work and train with me, get in touch. I'll always listen to you. I'll always give you a free consultation and a free evaluation of where I think you should sing. I love this channel that I'm creating. We're pushing 1,000 subscribers. Woohoo! We're getting loads of views. It's really building. It's really growing. So if you want to be part of this community, comment down below. Give me a sub. Find me on Facebook. Join the Facebook group. We have discussions on there. We've got so much to talk about. Thank you so much for joining me. I will see you in the next video. I will see you next week for the Jussi Björling tribute. Thanks for getting in touch. Bye-bye.